Welcome back. You're watching World Talks, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas is currently in Washington on a visit to meet Secretary of State Marco Rubio and discuss efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The visit comes on the heels of what can only be described as a seismic shift in foreign policy, as for the first time in Russia's war against Ukraine, Washington sided with Moscow, supporting a UN Security Council resolution that avoided criticism of the Kremlin's aggression. Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at Brussels Freedom Hub, is joining me now to discuss the latest on the subject. A very, very good morning and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Good morning from Brussels.
So, as I mentioned, Washington, for the first time in Russia's war against Ukraine, sided with Moscow, supporting that UN Security Council resolution that avoided criticism of the Kremlin's aggression. How would you comment on this development?
Well, you said it, seismic shift, a watershed moment, the end of the West. I mean, all these terms have been used in a couple of days of this week to describe the situation. I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say it's the end of the West, but it's definitely a major blow, probably the biggest since World War II. And indeed, the United States feels necessary to side with Russia very openly, because they think that this is what enables them to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. But the fact that they confuse the victim and the aggressor, and they confuse allies and adversaries, is depressing, I must say. And Europe will have to find an answer to this.
So what message does this resolution send to Russia, and how does it reflect the current level of U.S. commitment to European security? Are we sort of witnessing a redefinition of the transatlantic partnership, or is it something that we should have expected?
The signs were there, the writing was on the wall, but it was really hard to imagine this even a couple of weeks ago. The signaling that is happening here is that Russia understands the US is not ready to condemn imperial aggression, and that's really new. And in the meantime, Europe is resisting this move. Europe will not come along, at least not as a whole. There are a few countries, of course, that are now siding with the US and voting, in fact, with the US, such as Hungary. But no, most European countries are quite unhappy about this and are trying to counter it because they don't want aggression to be rewarded. And that is the main signal that everybody, not just Russia, but also China, Iran, North Korea, and other countries will gather from the US's voting behavior in the Security Council and the General Assembly.
Definitely, the optics of this situation are not good, especially when it comes to other countries, as you mentioned. According to some of the latest news when it comes to the relationship, the current relationship between Ukraine and the U.S., we learned from the unnamed Ukrainian official that Ukraine is prepared to sign a deal granting U.S. access to rare minerals. In exchange, the United States would actually contribute to a reconstruction fund for Ukraine. Zelensky, according to words by Donald Trump, might go to Washington on Friday himself. What could this deal change in recent U.S.-Ukraine relations, if anything at all? Because we're hearing statements from Donald Trump, and there are new statements issued every day. What are we to expect?
Claudia, it all depends on what you define as change. In other words, the signing this deal in its new form, not in the original proposed form of the weekend, is the precondition for any further U.S. support for Ukraine. How that support looks like, we will still see. Donald Trump presents it as payback for the, as he says, $350 billion that the U.S. has given Ukraine. The calculus on the European side is quite different. We don't see 350 billion given by the U.S. Most of the money stayed in the U.S. anyway. in terms of jobs for American arms factories. And Europe has invested much, much more in the security of Ukraine. Europe is not asking anything back. Anyway, so that's the specific calculus of the US here. Now,
So let me be more precise.
does-
Let me be more precise, because by change, are we to expect that at any point in time we could see any sort of security guarantees for Ukraine, or this is completely out of question?
That's too early to say. Very openly, it's impossible to guess right now. The signaling from the US, the early signaling from the US has been negative on that question. No US boots on the ground. And as to a US backstop for possible European peacekeeping troops, again, the mood music is negative, but the ultimate answer hasn't been given. That has to be worked out in the next couple of weeks, and I hope that Europe, the European Union and its strongest member states clearly make their ideas known in Washington.
The recent U.S.-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia definitely came as a surprise to many observers. On Tuesday, we found out, some media reported, there could be potentially next meeting supposed to take place, but Russia's foreign ministry denied it. What do you think motivated these discussions, and what could they mean for the transatlantic unity on Russia policy?
Well, the talks between Lavrov and Rubio of last week had the primary goal of reestablishing relations between Russia and the United States. So it was more of a bilateral thing. So they agreed to increase embassy staff, to normalize their relations, to actually prepare a meeting between Trump and Putin. There was relatively little about Ukraine and Russia and the war. So that will be somewhere in the future. And that is where exactly the Ukrainians and the Europeans together have to insist that they should be at the table. But initially here, this is about reestablishing relations between the US and Russia, which in itself is bad enough because the US has made all kinds of concessions where Russia hasn't made a single concession until now.
I mentioned Kaja Kallas before, the visit where she's supposed to meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. How do you think this meeting might actually influence the EU-U.S. cooperation when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine?
That's a good question, Claudia. One has to see that Marco Rubio is very much the executioner of Trump's policies. And today, he will have the president's ear, but he doesn't take any decisions. In this administration, the adults in the room, as it were, of the first Trump term are not there anymore. It's really Trump and Musk who are deciding things. So it's fair enough that Kaja Kallas presents Europe's positions to Marco Rubio. But if any breakthrough has been achieved in terms of communication to the U.S. government, Macron's meeting with Trump 2 days ago was much more important.
At the recent CPAC conference, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni made a strong pro-Ukrainian remarks. How would you interpret this stance, especially considering her earlier perceived alignment with right-wing populist movements?
Giorgia Meloni is between a rock and a hard place. She's, on the one hand, she's probably the European leader that is politically most aligned with the MAGA-led US government at the moment. And she's also personally respected by Trump. So she has a certain weight. And then, on the other hand, she needs to represent positions that the whole European Union shares in order to remain credible inside the EU and be acknowledged by her peers in the European Council. And the last point I would like to make here is this. Yes, she made some pro-Ukraine statements. Yes, she called upon CPAC to actually support Ukraine. but that was a drop in an ocean of anti-Ukraine, pro-Russia, is beginning of a new era rhetoric that the CPAC conference was full of. I mean, I myself have been to CPAC 8 years ago, and I saw what a freak show it can be. So I don't think Meloni's statements made much of a difference compared to the rest of what was said and transpired at CPAC.
Roland, pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for joining. Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at Brussels Freedom Hub.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. Do stay tuned. We have Diana's Kaja coming up next with the latest news bulletin.